Hello, this is Patrick Barnard in Montreal. It is February 27, 2025, and this is the 5th edition of the International Press Review. Today, I'm going to take you on a voyage that I made this past week through newspapers and electronic sites, and I'm going to show you what I discovered for myself, and I'm going to share these bits of information and insight with you. It's all about the Trump administration and what it thinks it is doing economically, because there is a plan at work. I find it quite astonishing and very risky, but the Trump people think that they know what they're doing. But I want to start by mentioning two Europeans. One is Yanis Varoufakis, the former finance minister of Greece, and the other is Martin Wolf, the very distinguished economic reporter at the Financial Times. So I'd like to start with this column of Martin Wolf. I don't know if you can see it. I've made a photograph of it, which is up on the screen. This was an extraordinary column if you know Martin Wolf's writings and books. The U.S. is now the enemy of the West. Washington has decided to abandon both Ukraine and its post-war role in the world. I think that's very accurate, actually. And in the column, Martin Wolf draws attention to the speech of American Vice President J.D. Vance at Munich. It was very shocking to Europeans. It was shocking to me because my own roots lie in World War II, actually. I've been around a long time. I was born then. Both Varoufakis and Wolf, by the way, come from families that were deeply, deeply affected by fascism in Europe. So when Martin Wolf says that the United States is the enemy of the West, what he means is that it's abandoned its humanist core values. And he's a journalist who always put a great deal of importance on the United States and what it represented. So this column is really quite extraordinary, I believe. Now, the other person I mentioned, Yanis Varoufakis, I got to know him through emails. I've never met him. Before he was the finance minister of Greece, before COVID, so I got on his email list. Now, what did that do in terms of this story? Well, I found myself reading this story by Yanis Varoufakis, and so I just, read a little bit of the beginning, okay? Faced with President Trump's economic moves, his centrist critics oscillate between desperation and a touching faith that his tariff frenzy will fizzle out. Well, Varoufakis says, not at all, because, and this is a direct quote, Trump's tariff fixation is part of a global economic plan that is solid, albeit inherently risky, close quote. And at the end of this piece that he wrote for Unheard, Varoufakis repeated again that he thought the planning that the Trump administration was involved with was actually impressive, all the while stressing that it carried great risks. Now, I learned about all of this and the key document that I'm going to be talking about today through this edition of Wire in India, actually. And it's a piece written by the freelance journalist Narendra Pakhedi, and he's a guy who digs things up. So I saw this piece, Trump's trade bluster, the hidden motives beneath the surface. So here was another journalist talking about this logic underneath what the Trump people are doing. And it was through this piece, published in India, that I was drawn to what I think is the key document in all of this. Now, there are two people in Washington who are carrying out this strange, I say strange, they don't think it's strange, tariff policy. One is Scott Bessent, the new U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, and the other is a man called Stephen Miran, whom many people have never heard of. Stephen Miran is a a very private person. He has a PhD in economics from Harvard. He was an official in the first Trump administration in the Treasury. Then he worked for Hudson Bay Capital, which is a hedge fund. And now he's going to be the head of the Council of Economic Advisors. There's only 3 people in that group, but they're very, very close to whoever is serving as president. In this case, Scott Bessent and Stephen Mirren are very close in their thinking. And before he left his full-time job at Hudson Bay Capital, Mirren wrote this paper. If you can see it, it's called A User's Guide to Restructuring the Global Trading System. It's 40-plus pages. It was set out, Mirren said, as just advice about how to carry out a tariff policy. But in fact, it's become the policy of the U.S. government. Again, the title of the Mirren document is A User's Guide to Restructuring the Global Trading System. In other words, it's a very radical conservative program that's being advocated here. And it is now policy, I believe. I think that Martin Wolf is going to be writing about this in a very short time, and I'm looking forward to him doing that. Yanis Varoufakis is a European left-wing economist. Why would he be attracted in any way by the ideas being put forward in the United States by Mr. Mirren and by Scott Bessent, the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury? I think the answer is quite simple. Varoufakis has written a book, The Global Minotaur, which is about the central question that is really troubling the Americans, and that is the hegemonic role of the United States dollar. Since 1944 and the Bretton Woods Conference, the U.S. dollar, in one way or another, has been the world's reserve currency. The Chinese buy American debt in dollars. People buy their oil and their energy in U.S. dollars. John Maynard Keynes in 1944 wanted a true world currency. That isn't what happened. Instead, the world got the dollar. And so did the Americans. In his very influential paper on restructuring the global trading system, Stephen Mirren in the United States goes back again and again to the duality of the dollar, both the privilege of having a world reserve currency that is your own and the burden that comes with that. What he means by that is the following. If you want to buy things, you can borrow your own money and pay for them. But that means that you end up accumulating very, very serious deficits, or you can. And indeed, since 1971, the United States has had dual deficits, both budget deficits and deficits of trade. And that is the thing that most worries Mirren and people like him, and they blame others for this fact. That, I think, is a fatal flaw, but nevertheless, that's what they feel, that other people are at fault. So what Mirren wants is for other countries, like the Europeans, basically to revalue their currencies upward. And he thinks the U.S. dollar is, in fact, overvalued. So he and Scott Bessent want the U.S. dollar to go down. They actually want it to go down. Now, the argument presented in Mr. Mirren's paper is threefold. It involves trade, it involves defense, and it involves currency. In terms of trade, he proposes tariffs, the use of tariffs, to in fact make it more difficult for foreigners to compete in the U.S. market and to encourage producers, manufacturers of all kinds to jump over that tariff wall and put plants in the United States. It's a way of making the U.S. more competitive, thinks Mr. Mirren. In defense, he's in favor of actually using what Mr. Bessent at Treasury calls a system of buckets. You treat all your partners differently. If they behave the way you want them to and they spend more on their defense, then you go easy with the tariffs. If they don't behave in your view, then you slam on the tariffs. And the third thing is the currency objectives. That is to say, to get the American dollar, in fact, to go down. Now, all of this is full of tremendous risk. And the amazing thing about the Mirren paper is that he actually acknowledges that again and again. He calls the policy that he's advocating a narrow path that is full of risk, but is nonetheless worth taking. Personally, I find that extraordinary. I think you're going to be hearing a lot of public discussion of these ideas of Mr. Besant and Mr. Miran in particular. Already dissenting economic voices have floated to the surface very visibly in France. Two economists cited by Mr. Miran for his discussion of what a maximum level might be for tariffs have said that the use he made of their work was in fact quite wrong. They published this op-ed in Le Monde, a bad idea, speaking out against the use that Miran was making of their model, saying it was a good teaching tool, but it should not be taken literally. I'd like to finish this press review just to read their words to you, because I think they're very telling. So here's what they say. The world economy has changed. China has emerged as a new hegemon. It is natural for U.S. economic policy to change and adapt to the new circumstances, but tariffs are not the powerful tool to solve all problems that the new Trump administration believes them to be. A richer set of economic policies are needed, with tariffs playing at best an auxiliary role. Pursuing a policy of raising tariffs would most likely lead to a new global trade war. Its consequences, unfortunately, are not hard to predict. It would mean less trade and, most importantly, less international cooperation on the big issues of the day: poverty, war, and climate change.